Yeah, I was just wondering from your political party's point of view whether you think the current Human Rights Act is fit for purpose in terms of its implementation and what it stands for. And I think you mentioned in your kind of opening statements about widening it and maybe improving it. So one is, do you think it's fit for purpose, and how would you improve, you know, from your party's point of view, how would you improve it?
If you want to say what's in our policies as the Socialist Party, which is part of TUSC, which is a trade unionist and socialist coalition. It was actually the 6th largest party at the last election, but no one's ever heard of it. Our policies are actually, what the gentleman said, we want to reduce the working week and spread out jobs so that everyone actually has employment. We think that everyone has something to contribute to society, and so what we would strengthen in it more than anything else, I think, is the economic rights that is missing from that. It's got the right to education, but doesn't have the right to free education. Doesn't have the right to free education from everyone from 4 years old up to university level, which is what we would stand for. And we would abolish tuition fees, for example, abolish £9,000 a year that people have to pay to go to university. There's one example there. Sure Start centres as well that have been taken away by the government. Well, that should be a right for kids to actually have a decent education, a decent, stable family upbringing. And also the rights of minorities and cultural rights. I think I agree with what Matthew was saying there. The right for people, if they haven't got access to books, then to be able to visit a library, to be able to go onto the internet. Because not everyone's got computers, not everyone's got their resources at home to actually give them, and they can give themselves an education then. So, yeah, that's really important.
And certainly from my perspective, I mean, just on some of Andrew's points there, I mean, I think in terms of free education, I mean, you know, I don't think it needs for me to repeat that my party said one thing before the 2010 election on tuition fees, and then did something diametrically opposed when it got into government. I couldn't and I wouldn't seek to defend that. I and many of our ordinary party members were against it, and I don't think we ever recovered from that. I hope we can now recover. Now we've had this absolute smattering and bashing at the election, and you know, now we have a new leader. I still support free education, and the irony of the Lib Dems position is that I think in terms of policy agreed by the membership at our conference, that is still our policy. That is still our policy. That should be the case. I guess difficulty is now is who would believe that was our policy, and you know, quite right. You know, I also agree, and I think Andrew probably will agree with me on this as well, that we should see a redistribution of the wealth of this country. That's not, I'm sure I said this last year, but that's not anti-enterprise. I absolutely believe in enterprise and in job making and in wealth creation, but that shouldn't be on the backs of the poorest people in our society. And I think difficulty is, and I guess one new thing that I can say is that obviously since last year we've seen the election of Jeremy Corbyn as the Labour leader, and I think it's a really interesting case study, because here is someone who is devoutly anti-austerity, devoutly, I'm sure he'd absolutely describe himself as a socialist, you know, and believer in redistribution of wealth and the rest. And he was elected by the absolute popular mandate of his party, you know, 200,000 plus members. But almost, well, from before he was elected, but certainly from the moment of his election, the establishment, the whole of the rest of the political establishment and the media establishment have done, and I'm sure will continue to until he's probably forced out at some point, to totally denounce every single thing that he stands for, because it's such a threat to their retaining their power and their wealth and their influence. And as much as I, of course, don't agree with him on everything, and I shouldn't necessarily as someone from a different political party, but I think it's been disgraceful to see the way that he has been persecuted, even to the point whereas, and you know, it made me laugh, on my phone, you know, I'm on Twitter and I get the newspaper front pages, you know, the day before they come out, the evening before, and on one day, some were attacking him on their front page they had him as a court jester, about to bend the knee before the Queen in terms of the Privy Council, and they said, oh, here's a Republican abandoning his principles. The very next day, the Sun had him on their front page denouncing him for not having sung the national anthem. Now, which is it? Which is it, you know? And so I think, as much as Andrew and myself might want to see things such as free education and the redistribution of wealth and other things, when you get someone in a position, a genuine position of power as leader of the opposition, even his own Blairite backbenches will not give him any time at all to try and set that agenda out. And I think he'll probably be gone by next May, if not before. And so, and I think that is part of this wider discussion about human rights, because how do people get genuine, and it goes back to concerns about the voting system, doesn't it? How do people genuinely get proper representation of how they voted? I mean, you know, the Lib Dems, despite the fact we had an absolute bashing, still had, you know, a million votes, which means that realistically we shouldn't have 8 MPs, we should have 50 odd. TUSC probably should have some kind of representation, you know, being the 6th largest party. The Greens certainly should have more than one MP. And so I guess in a sense we can talk about this, but probably until there's genuine voting reform, which even the likes of UKIP support, because they should probably have, I'm afraid to tell you, a few more MPs as well, then I think in a sense we're kind of whistling in the wind, because I don't think much of this will actually change.
Just come back a little bit on that. TUSC was actually set up to... It was because of the failures of New Labour that TUSC was set up back in 2009 to contest the 2010 election, actually. And it was set up by the RMT union, the rail workers union under Bob Crow, who sadly died later. And it was because we felt frustrated and unable to work within Labour, Blairites, and why Corbyn's being attacked. Because 90% of his own MPs don't agree with what he's saying. And 90% probably of Labour councillors don't agree with him either. 400,000 people joined the Labour Party because they were enthused by what he was saying and wanted to get involved. Quite a lot of young people actually as well. And we are completely behind him. But we are barred from joining Labour ourselves because we stood against Labour, and we're not seen as sharing Labour values. Now I would ask, which Labour values are we sharing? We share the Labour values of the post-war Labour government of Attlee, when they brought in the NHS, they brought in the welfare state, they brought in the beverage reforms. Yeah, they brought in the idea that actually the government is there to provide a safety net for people, and there's some basic human needs, and this ties in with human rights actually. The right not to be afraid when you become sick that you cannot afford health care. The right that when you become unemployed, under capitalism there's always going to be unemployment. So the right when you become unemployed to actually get something to actually enable you to have a reasonable standard of living. Right. And all that's been taken away from us. Everything that people fought for, and it was only because people were actually turning from the front after the Second World War with arms that the government felt inclined to give them all these things. Not because they wanted to, it was simply because they were under threat politically. And so even in the Labour government of that time, there had to be big battles to get the NHS, actually, and big battles to get all these reforms that people won. And all of these things have been taken away. And so what we are saying is we want to return to that sort of party where we can advocate the ideas of socialism, advocate community, and people actually being able to have a real voice. And that is why this is so important, actually.
Okay, thank you.